only causes them to go further pulling away and shutting down. Every man has had that experience where you just, something upsets you so much you just shut down and you just don't care and you don't feel anything. That's your body's attempt to disconnect in order to lower the estrogen in order to rebuild testosterone. Now, see, psychology doesn't understand biology. We don't want these boys talking about their feelings at that time. We want to teach boys that when you're upset, you need to detach. It's okay to just do what men used to do, is forget it, don't worry about it, leave it alone, and then do something to use your muscles. If you do something to use your muscles, you burn off the adrenaline, first of all. Second, you start rebuilding your testosterone. Then, after you're feeling good, then you make jokes about what just happened. You've got to lighten up the subject. And still, then, if you still need to process it, that's when you talk about your feelings. Is men should not go deep down until they can make jokes about it, and they're not going to make jokes about it until their testosterone level rises up again. And this is just horrendous to many therapists. Now, if I'm a man and I have a loss and I'm upset about something, and I go to my therapist's office, well, generally I drove my car to get there. I'm managing in my life, so pretty much my testosterone's back up. So then it's a benefit to go into my feelings. But even then, it should be more along the line of Freudian therapy, where you're analyzing your emotions and challenging the thoughts that are giving rise to the emotion. So it's more of an analysis from a detached perspective, as well as to bring some feeling into it, of course. But for females, they need to first vent. They need to first go through layers and layers of feeling. Like if you're angry, you need to feel the disappointment, sadness. Then you need to go deeper and feel fears. Then you get in touch with your needs and wishes and wants. Then you start analyzing and challenging and finding out, how to be reasonable about it. So there's different processes for men versus different processes for women. We have to recognize this today. And it's more important today than ever before. Why? Because today our culture supports, and this is a good thing, this is really important, our culture supports women expressing their masculine qualities. Our culture supports men being more feeling, more emotional, more supportive, and doing more nurturing things. This is a step of progress. This is a good thing that any individual can express all parts of them, both what we'll call traditional male qualities or traditional female qualities. Now, the problem is when women become too masculine, they're having difficulty coming back to feeling love and happiness and joy. They have difficulty coming back and producing female hormones when they're making male hormones all day. So my work is to help women identify the symptoms of imbalance, coming back to the female, how to use your relationships to do that, how to make changes in your life to do that, so you're balancing the male and female side of you. And for men, they need to understand how to come back to the masculine side if they're feeling anger, irritability, anxiety, procrastination, inability to focus, all these problems that men are having, and also not being able to sustain arousal and a connection in their relationships. There are things we're doing today that are causing these problems, and there's choices we can make that will bring us back to feeling more centered as men, more confident as men, more focused, not procrastinating, not getting angry, not becoming irritable, not becoming grumbly. Depression, for example, depression in males, irritability in males, or even anger in males is always associated with low testosterone. Most people think it's high testosterone, but actually all those symptoms I just mentioned is testosterone converting into estrogen, which is what happens to men when their cortisol levels are elevated.
Now, to correct some of this stuff, what age do we need to start shifting? In other words, how early on can we make it? And it sounds like one of the things you're saying is to start off with is to change the diet so that we're not starting in the wrong direction. And it sounds like we should be starting that, at a pretty early age?
Oh, absolutely. One of the challenges when it comes to brain function is that the high carbohydrate diet that we have, when you're feeding kids lots of sugar and the sweets and the processed foods, one of the problems with that is it depletes the brain of the feel-good mineral. There's a mineral which is, I call the feel-good. Whenever you're really happy, like you have some ice cream. I'm not against those things. I'm just saying in super moderation. We had a special day. We went to a theater with the grandkids and everything. I had ice cream, probably the first time in 7 months. But, we celebrate. We're out in the sun. You have fun. So occasional things treats is fine. But when I had that ice cream, boy, did I feel good. Well, that feeling good is always producing a lot of dopamine and serotonin in the brain. And when you make those feel-good brain chemicals to a higher level, it depletes the brain of the feel-good minerals. One of those minerals is lithium. Lithium works together with calcium, magnesium, zinc, and potassium. They all work together to produce and regulate the production of dopamine and serotonin. We're most vulnerable when it comes to lithium, although we can run out of all of them if we're either high-stressed, intense negative feeling, or intense positive feeling depletes the brain of these minerals. One of the reasons people become chronically depressed is because, well, as soon as you're depressed, it's the outcome of depletion of minerals, and you're not doing anything to increase your minerals. You just stay depressed. And if you get some minerals, you'll tend to have just intense feelings associated with the depression, which will deplete you even more. We have to recognize that every mood we have has a physiological foundation for it. And there's so much misinformation about lithium. Lithium is the most wonderful mineral, but the psychiatrists have given it in a form which doesn't work unless you give toxic doses. That's lithium carbonate. Only helps the most extreme imbalances of psychosis. It helps with that, but it helps with everything. But in order for it to work, they have to give 500 times the natural dose. So we can call it low dose. Actually, it's real dose, healthy dose of lithium is what anybody could use if they're under stress. And it's not the lithium carbonate. They have to give high doses of lithium carbonate because it doesn't cross the blood-brain barrier. Minerals don't cross the blood-brain barrier, period, if you're taking them as supplements. In food, they do. But our food's usually deficient in it, and when we eat the processed carbohydrates, it depletes us of those minerals. So we have to balance by taking supplements, and Dr. Nieper figured out, he's a German doctor, if you bond lithium and potassium, calcium, zinc, any of those, to uric acid, it's a substance that's in mother's milk. If you take that uric acid, it's also in cow's milk, and they take that uric acid and they bind it to the minerals, it becomes a carrier and carries them across the brain, blood-brain barrier, and then you don't have to take toxic doses. But because psychiatrists use lithium carbonate, people are afraid of it because all this research shows the side effects or negative side effects of taking lithium carbonate, not lithium orotate. And lithium carbonate is not bad either. It just doesn't work unless you give huge doses. And anytime you take any mineral in maximum doses, 50 times the dose, 100 times the dose, there's going to be side effects. Anything good taken too much is bad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, of course. So if we're making the adjustments early on, in the situations where the adjustments aren't being made, is this also taking us in that direction that we're having such an incredible increase in ADHD in young people?
Absolutely. ADHD actually starts for many children right in the womb. They've done research studies showing that if mothers take Tylenol during the pregnancy for 5 days, the risk of ADHD goes up 500%. Are dramatically increased. Even if autism goes up higher, 5 times as many boys as girls are having autistic symptoms, and this is like a epidemic that most people aren't aware of. Is the learning difficulties and challenges in boys is off the chart. And most dramatic example is California is the highest. 1 out of 32 boys last year were diagnosed on the spectrum, autistic spectrum. That's 1 out of 32 children. This is like a disaster. Nationwide, it's about 1 out of 50 boys, and 5 times as many boys as girls. And a lot of this has to do with what happens in the womb. A lot of it has to do with toxicity once they're out of the womb, and what we feed our children today. When the brain is developing, it's very crucial that we don't expose those kids to these toxic substances, whether they be heavy metals, drugs that have heavy metals in them, or it could be the non-organic foods, the high sugar content, the low zinc in the diet. Boys possibly... one of the reasons boys are more vulnerable to all of this is while their brain is developing in the first couple of years, their testosterone levels are twice as high as a girl. Not twice as high, as they're 30 times as high as a girl. They're like that of a grown man for the first 2 years. And in order to make that testosterone, the body uses up zinc. Now, zinc is the brain's neuroprotector as well from all the mercury and heavy metals in the environment. So boys are way more vulnerable to the heavy metal toxicity than girls. And as possibly one of the conditions that's giving rise to the epidemic of autism. But much milder version of that is the ADHD one. So we've got, when I mentioned Tylenol, acetaminophen is the active ingredient in there that depletes the body of antioxidants. Antioxidants also protect the brain from all this toxicity. And there's over 500 over-the-counter drugs that have acetaminophen in it. You know, you go to that drugstore and you give your kids the cold syrup or this syrup or digestive this, all those things. Look at, you'll see acetaminophen is everywhere, and it is a poison. I mean, you have acetaminophen poisoning. You have to go to the hospital, over 600 cases or something like that a year, and or a much bigger number than that. And what it does, it inhibits the body's production of something called glutathione, which is a super antioxidant that neutralizes free radicals. If you don't have enough glutathione, you get something called oxidative stress in the brain. There's over 100,000 studies on oxidative stress in the brain causing brain problems, from dementia to Alzheimer's to ADHD to memory loss, all these kinds of problems, to Parkinson's. It's glutathione, which is this antioxidant. We just have too many free radicals. And then once again, bad diet, sugar, junk food, pesticides, all that gives rise to higher levels of free radicals. And we need to have this glutathione, which your body makes. It's not. You can also take it. That helps. You can go online. You can see people with Parkinson's just getting an IV drip of glutathione. All their symptoms temporarily go away. I mean, gone. I mean, not all their symptoms, but they can't walk, they can't talk, and suddenly they can walk and talk within an hour. But it goes away the next day because they're not making that glutathione. So that's really important. In my book, Staying Focused, I talk about all these researched alternatives to taking ADHD drugs. ADHD drugs, I now list in the most recent book, because the research keeps coming out. The 7 universities showing that they cause brain damage. Now, we didn't know that 18 years ago when New York Times came out and said it's a miracle, improve children's performance, take these drugs, parents give them to your kids, doctors read all that, doctors are, giving it out like candy. And now we see that, these are just low-dose cocaine and low-dose speed methamphetamines. Your brain works temporarily better. Like every Hollywood writer knows, you get on speed and you write stuff, but there's side effects to it, and there's ways to do it without. You can still develop your full mental potential without having to take drugs. And parents need to know that brain injury occurs. The research says brain damage. I call it brain injury because I know I was able to reverse mine. So for thousands of people who've approached me and told me that these ideas had helped their children tremendously, dramatically, within days sometimes, you always will see dramatic improvement without taking the drugs. The drugs do cause brain injury. And just like why cocaine and methamphetamines are illegal and not good for you, that should be the case with Ritalin and Adderall. But unfortunately, parents don't know that.
Well, how do we get our bodies to naturally produce more glutathione? Because, for instance, when you were talking about the IV drip, okay, that part is great from the standpoint of it's temporarily doing it. You're saying the reason, I don't know that we can have somebody get an IV drip every day or however long it takes to wear off.
Definitely. No. We want to be able to, what I formulated for my own. See, when I got IV drips in order to reverse my Parkinson's. And then what I did, and I also, by the way, I took a substance which anybody can get called NADH. But you have to take high doses of it, 20 milligrams, 2 tiny little tablets twice a day, will have a huge impact on anybody to improve brain function because it oxygenates the brain. I did IV drips of that plus amino acids, and it reversed my symptoms of Parkinson's for about 2 months, I think it was, and then it came back. So I figured out a formula of how to make my body's own glutathione, and now lots of people do it. But 20 years ago when I developed this, not very many people did. I just did it by symptoms. Now we have huge research showing that undenatured whey protein, it's very high in an amino acid called cysteine. And you take that undenatured whey protein and make a superfood shake out of it. You add omega-3 to it. You put in some supplements. You put in some minerals. It's amazing to stimulate the production of dopamine in the brain, to restore normal dopamine function by the Dairy protein has super high levels of cysteine that